In a quiet suburb, Maria Corr's life took a dark turn that would shock an entire nation. A tale of love, betrayal, and tragedy unfolded, painting a picture of deceit and despair. The events that followed would grip the community in fear and disbelief, revealing secrets and lies that no one could have foreseen. Maria is a 50-year-old Australian woman, also known as Maria Matilde. She was born in Portugal on January 14, 1955, but her parents were Australian. Growing up in Melbourne, Maria was a devout Christian and had a daughter named Laura from her first marriage. Sadly, Maria became a widow when her husband passed away. In May 1998, Maria met Joseph Corr, who eventually became her second husband. Initially uninterested, Maria eventually married Joe after his persistent efforts. Together, they formed a small but happy family with Maria's daughter, Laura. Despite financial struggles, Joe bought a piece of land where they built their dream home through hard work. Maria worked 2 jobs for over 12 hours a day, while Joe also worked very hard. Their efforts paid off when they completed their dream house. To their joy, Maria discovered she was pregnant with their child and welcomed a son named Damien into their loving family. They were a regular, perfect family. They hardly ever argued, and even if they did, it was just a little bit. They had a beautiful house, a lovely family, and now their own child. Everything seemed perfect for that family until Maria started noticing some strange things about Joe. He started keeping late nights a lot because of his job, and it used to happen sometimes, but now it was happening more frequently, like at least once a month, sometimes twice. This made Maria start doubting if he was being faithful. So she began doing her own investigation to find out more. She checked out Joe's old bank statements and discovered that when he was supposed to be on a business trip in Sydney, he was actually taking out money in Victoria, which are 2 different places. Joe tried to explain it to Maria, saying, "I went to 2 different places on this business trip, not just Sydney." Even though Maria forgave him and accepted the explanation, she never really forgot what had happened. Maria wasn't fully convinced, but she accepted Joe's excuse because she didn't want to start arguments. Even though his excuse seemed reasonable, she wasn't completely sure. So when Joe was on another business trip, Maria decided to check his computer. Her suspicions were confirmed when she found Joe's profile on a dating website. This wasn't just any dating site, it was for couples to meet other couples. The problem was, Joe's profile wasn't with Maria, it was with another woman. Joe had a hidden relationship with Tanya Herman, a 38-year-old single mother. When Maria found out and confronted him, Joe realized he could lose his whole family. He couldn't talk his way out of it because Maria had proof. Joe begged for forgiveness, and Maria, being forgiving and loving, gave him another chance. This was maybe his 3rd chance by now, and Maria had seen proof of what was happening. Despite that, she forgave him. But she didn't forget. She stayed with him for the sake of the kids and their marriage because she loved him. However, deep down, she never truly forgot what he did. She promised not to hold it against him, but she was always cautious about what he had done. He was very close to losing Maria. If she hadn't been a loving and forgiving person, he would have lost her. Joe knew she was almost at the end of her patience, so he decided to end the secret relationship with Tanya Herman. He was to cut it off and focus on his marriage, kids, and home. Joe stopped going on business trips and had to find a way to make Tanya Herman stop contacting him. Joe Corr sent an email to Tanya Herman, pretending to be someone else, not himself. He acted like an official, saying that Joe had died in a car crash in Barcelona. Tanya was heartbroken, even though she was Joe's mistress. She was still in a relationship with him, and now she believed he was dead. After being faithful to Maria for about a month, Joe couldn't do it anymore. He went back to Tanya's doorstep and told her, "I wasn't actually dead, I was just really hurt." Tanya was hesitant to take him back at first. He had lied about being dead to make her stop talking to him, and now he was back, trying to get her back. So Joe was always trying to win Tanya over, even though he already had Maria at home. He kept trying to get his other woman back, but it wasn't working. Tanya wouldn't take him back. Joe thought about what he could do to win her back, and he decided to propose to her. Surprisingly, it worked. Now Joe had a wife, Maria, and a fiancée, Tanya. Tanya also had a daughter. Joe had a lot of children and spouses. Meanwhile, Maria was at home thinking that Joe had cut off ties with Tanya Herman and that everything was good in their marriage. She was even packing for their second honeymoon, a holiday to renew their vows and start fresh. While he was out proposing to another woman, Maria found Joe's phone after a month of him juggling these two separate lives. She saw a text from Tanya Herman, but this time Joe didn't just beg for her to come back. He threatened Maria, saying that if she left him, he would harm himself and Maria. She was a very kind and loving person. Even though he cheated on her many times and treated her badly, she loved him. She didn't want the man she loved to harm himself over her, so she felt she had no choice but to stay with him and hope he would cut off ties with Tanya. They stayed together, and everyone knew what was going on. Tanya knew Maria was still with him, and Maria knew he was still with Tanya. It was a difficult situation, and no one was happy, but they just keep it going. Maria knew about Tanya, but she didn't know he had proposed to her in early 2005. Maria took out a restraining order against her husband, Joe. The restraining order Maria got said that Joe couldn't assault, harass, molest, threaten, or intimidate her. She wanted to make sure he couldn't use suicide as a threat if she tried to leave him. There's no evidence that Joe was ever abusive or violent toward Maria, and there were no reports of anything like that. On Wednesday, February 9, 2005, Maria Core didn't pick up her son Damien from school. Maria had never done this before. She had never been late or forgotten to pick up Jamie from school. She was reported missing on the same day. Usually families wait until the next day when someone goes missing because there's often an explanation. But this was so unlike Maria that her family felt something must be wrong. It was not normal for her. The last person who reported seeing Maria was Joe Core, and he said he saw her at 6:30 a.m. That morning, before he went to work, Maria was still at home. The police questioned all of Maria's family, including Joe, the kids, friends, and everyone. Not as suspects, but just to understand who Maria was, her routine, and what kind of person she was. The police were trying to figure out where she might be. They asked Maria's friends and family if she had any known enemies, but no one knew of any. She wasn't the type to argue with people, so nobody mentioned anything except Joe Core. He mentioned his mistress, Tanya Herman. But he wasn't completely honest about his relationship. He said Tanya was his ex-girlfriend who was still obsessed with him and didn't like Maria. The police got suspicious, so they went to talk to Tanya Herman. While Joe said she was an ex, Tanya told the police the truth, that they were engaged and planning to get married. This immediately raised concerns for the police. Joe must be lying about their relationship because Tanya had no reason to lie and said they're engaged. What would she gain from lying? On the other hand, Joe had a reason to lie by saying she's just crazy because she didn't want his family to turn against him. He didn't want to look like a cheating husband when his wife had gone missing. Joe tried to explain this by saying Tanya was a crazy ex, obsessed and delusional, always stalking him, painting her as a bad person. Still, 4 days after Maria's disappearance, she hadn't been found or seen, and no one had given any information. It was like she had vanished for 4 days, and everyone was confused. At this point, the police thought they would start treating the case as a murder investigation. They hadn't officially declared it a murder investigation yet because only 4 days had passed and they hadn't officially stated it. However, they started doing things that made people think Maria wasn't safe. They decided to search Tanya Herman's hometown, Joe's car, the house where Maria and Joe lived, and her workplace. They were searching everything, and this made Maria's family really worried, thinking they were looking for evidence for a murder. On February 13, 2005, 4 days after Maria's disappearance, a local park worker in Melbourne noticed a car parked on the side of the road for 4 days straight. It hadn't moved and no one had been in it. He went to check it out, thinking it might have been broken into. As he got closer, he noticed a strong, bad smell coming from the car. Worried about what it could be, he called the police. However, they also noticed the bad smell. They decided to break into the car, specifically the trunk, and there they found what they thought was a clearly identifiable dead body. The body was in terrible condition and it smelled awful. It had been in the trunk of the car in the summer heat for 4 days, and they believed there was no way this person could still be alive. They were going to call someone to take the body to a morgue when they saw the chest move. Looked like the person in the trunk took a strained breath. Panicking, the police quickly called an ambulance to take the body to the nearest hospital and see if they could revive this person. At the hospital, the body was identified as Maria Kor. Miraculously, Maria was still alive, but she was in very critical condition, dangerously close to death. As if she had stayed in that car for just a few more hours, she might not have survived. Here's a list of the injuries Maria had. 9 blood clots and bruises, a battered face, a broken arm, and marks around her neck, suggesting she had been strangled at some point. She was severely dehydrated and had suffered from a lack of oxygen to the brain, causing severe brain damage. When they got her to the hospital, she wasn't responding, so they put her into a medically induced coma. This helped the hospital staff treat her various injuries simultaneously, like hydrating her and trying to reverse the brain damage. The story immediately became big news in the media. A woman was found in the trunk of her own car, Maria's car, after being there for 4 days, almost dead. The press quickly started looking for information about this woman in the trunk, which they called the woman in the boot. They soon found out about her troubled home life. Her husband had another woman on the side, a whole fiancée, in addition to his wife. This became a significant part of the case, and many people thought they were guilty, even though there wasn't specific evidence in the public yet. Everyone just assumed it must be them. Tanya and Joe became like celebrities in Melbourne, and the police also found them suspicious due to the family circumstances. Although there was no specific evidence pointing to either of them, the police believed they had a motive to kill Maria. The police started investigating by questioning friends and family and checking phone records. They gathered enough evidence to bring Tanya and Joe to the police station for questioning as suspects. Tanya was the first to be questioned, and the police soon realized that she had a very dependent personality. She was vulnerable and relied a lot on Joe. Tanya had been through 2 previous marriages. The first ended because her husband had an affair. The second ended with her husband passing away, leaving her a widow. Tanya herself had cancer before, but she successfully got treated for it. During her treatment, and even now, she has never told her family about it. No one in her family, including her 2 children, parents, friends, or colleagues, knew about her cancer. When she had treatment, her hair fell out, so she shaved her head herself and said it was for charity. After the death of her second husband and her battle with cancer, Tanya became very depressed and lonely. She rarely left the house or saw friends and family. To meet people without leaving home, she tried online dating. That's where she met Joe Kor, but she didn't know he was married at first. They went on a few dates, things got serious, and then she found out he had a wife and kids at home. She wanted to break up with him, but she didn't want to lose him. Having been through so much pain in her life, she couldn't face losing another person, even though he was married with children and a whole other life. She stayed with him, settling for less because she didn't have as much self-respect as before. Joe painted a beautiful picture for Tanya, telling her they would have an amazing life together, run away, have kids, and live together. She even changed her legal name on documents to Tanya Herman Kor, and they went shopping for wedding rings together. I'm not trying to justify Tanya's actions in being with a married man and getting engaged to him. I'm just trying to show you how this seemed possible in her head. She had very low self-esteem after experiencing so much loss and going through a lot. She was depressed and had been through so much in her life that her self-esteem was so low. She didn't believe she deserved more than a married man. She didn't think she deserved her own man, her own life, or her own family. She felt like this is what she deserved. She was just going to take it because she liked Joe and didn't want to be alone. She needed emotional gratification, having been alone for so long. When someone finally came along calling her beautiful and saying they loved her, she needed that. She was a very dependent and vulnerable person. When someone finally came along calling her beautiful and saying they loved her, she needed that. She was a very dependent and vulnerable person. Tanya couldn't bear the thought of losing another person in her life. Even though Joe was married with children and had a whole separate life, Tanya lacked the self-respect she once had, settling for less. Joe painted a dream life for Tanya, promising a future together, and they even shopped for wedding rings. Despite Tanya's engagement with a married man, it wasn't an attempt to justify her actions. It's about understanding her low self-esteem, depression, and vulnerability. She felt undeserving of a better life, thinking this is what she deserved. Tanya needed emotional gratification, having been alone for so long, and couldn't face losing Joe. Tanya realized she was being manipulated by Joe, acknowledging her vulnerability. Joe influenced her preferences, made her sever ties with friends, and convinced her to sell her house and move closer to him. Tanya's daughter even began to see Joe as a father figure. Joe made unsettling comments expressing a desire for Maria's removal and even suggesting Tanya commit murder. When Joe brought a bag containing items for the crime, Tanya panicked, realizing he was serious. Despite her reluctance, Joe emotionally manipulated her, threatening to return to Maria if she refused. She couldn't bear the thought of losing another person. Even though he was married with children, he had a whole separate life from her. She lacked the self-respect she once had and settled for less by staying with him. Joe was selling Tanya a dream, promising an amazing life together, and they even shopped for wedding rings. Tanya, dealing with low self-esteem and past losses, felt she didn't deserve more than a married man. Lonely and vulnerable, she craved emotional gratification and clung to Joe. Realizing she was being manipulated, Tanya, in a police statement, admitted feeling brainwashed by Joe's promises. He controlled her choices, convinced her to wear only black, and isolated her from friends. She sold her house and moved to be near Joe, living in the same neighborhood as his family. Tanya enrolled her daughter in a new school, listing Joe as an emergency contact, and her daughter started calling him Dad. Joe's strange comments escalated to expressing a desire for Maria's death. Tanya initially dismissed them, but grew alarmed when Joe brought a bag with murder tools. This how to get away with murder bag included a swimming cap to avoid leaving any hair, a bag meant for strangling, a ski mask to cover Tanya's hands so there were no fingerprints to avoid leaving any evidence. Tanya panicked, refusing to commit murder. Joe, manipulative as ever, threatened to return to Maria if she didn't comply, leading Tanya to contemplate the unthinkable. Tanya was in a place where she couldn't bear to lose Joe. She was really down, dealing with a lot of sadness and feeling very bad about herself. Her self-esteem was so low that she believed being with Joe, even if it meant killing someone, was her only option. She felt like her whole life, happiness, and everything depended on Joe. She thought if she didn't do what he wanted, her life would be ruined away. During Joe's questioning, he wasn't cooperating and got upset with the police, saying he was her husband and why would he do something like that to her. It was clear that he wasn't helping the police with their investigation. To make Joe talk, the police decided to share Tanya's side of the story with him. That's when Joe got really angry, calling Tanya a liar, saying she was obsessed with him, hated Maria, and even mentioned a gun. He claimed it was all Tanya's fault, but Tanya's version matched the evidence, and she had no reason to lie, unlike Joe. He had a lot at stake in this situation, and the police tended to believe Tanya more than Joe. This was because Joe had a history of lying, claiming Tanya was just a crazy ex obsessed with him. However, Tanya could prove Joe had proposed to her, as she possessed the ring. Tanya then recounted the day she murdered Maria Corr to the police. On the morning of February 9th, Joe picked up Tanya, drove her to the house he shared with Maria, and led her into the garage. Joe then left for work, providing himself with an alibi. The police overlooked Tanya's alibi, and Joe did not lie for her, as he was genuinely at work. Joe's last words to Tanya before leaving her in the garage to kill his wife were a disturbing inquiry about her love for him. Tanya, wearing a swim cap, Joe's shoes, and white gardening gloves, waited in the dark garage corner for Maria. When Maria arrived, Tanya attacked her, describing the experience as detached. Despite thinking she had killed Maria, Tanya panicked when she realized Maria had only passed out. She put Maria's body in the trunk of the car and drove aimlessly in a panic until she heard sounds from the trunk. Panicking further, Tanya abandoned the car on a deserted road, leaving Maria's body. Later, Tanya took lunch to Joe at work, burned the clothes she wore that day, and shared a meal with him. The police, initially trusting Tanya's detailed confession, believed Joe was an accessory to Maria's attempted murder. In June, Maria was still in a coma. Tanya pleaded guilty and received a sentence, while Joe was tried for conspiracy to murder. However, Maria's condition worsened, leading to the decision to stop treatment in July. Joe was banned from Maria's funeral, but organized his own event, displaying signs of guilt. Joe's troubled state continued, resulting in a dramatic incident where he appeared suicidal. He was found dead after falling from a ladder. Questions arose about whether it was a genuine suicide attempt or an act to garner sympathy and reduce his sentence. In the end, despite the turmoil and questions surrounding Joe's death, Tanya sought permission to marry in 2013 and was eventually released in 2014 for demonstrating good behavior. Embarking on a fresh start, she began a new chapter with her fiancé, Nicole Muscat. The case, marred by deceit, disloyalty, and sorrow, reached its resolution, with Tanya serving her sentence in the tragic end of Joe's life. If you found this video interesting, please hit the like button, subscribe to our channel, and turn on the notification bell to stay updated on our latest true crime content. Your support helps us continue to cover these important stories. Share your thoughts in the comments below, and remember, stay safe and take care of yourself and your loved ones. Until next time.